Hi, everybody. I'm Luke Timmerman, founder and editor of Timmerman Report. Pleasure to be here today at the Biopharma CEO Investor Forum. And I'm here to introduce the CEO of UCB, Jean-Christophe Tellier.
Thank you, Luke. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for the invitation. I think we can share the slide right now, so I can go through the presentations and try to cover with you our agenda in terms of sustainable growth for the company right now and for the future. After the slide, it is just after this one that you will see the classical disclaimer and safe harbor. I wanted to start with a little bit of an illustrations of who we are. And I'm sure that the majority of you know well UCB, but I was thinking that with this topic of sustainability and connecting societal value and company and business success, it was important to put that in the perspective of our funders. I mean, the company has been founded 93 years ago by Emmanuel Johnson. And I think that maybe there is something special in companies where there is such an important link to a family. The family still owns 35% of UCB today. It's a reference shareholder for us. And this means also that by nature, families have long-term views and objective of thinking more in generations than in quarters. The company has been through a lot of different challenges, as you can imagine, for the last 93 years. And so resilience and ability to adapt, to continuously evolve, to be agile, has been in the DNA of the company for years. And I think that if you see the last 12 to 18 months, COVID pandemic have created for all companies, for all of us, a lot of challenges and requirement of resilience. One of which I think have been the necessity for us to collaborate and to work differently in the environment we are in. And when we think about business successes and societal impact, I think the first thing that I would like to share with you is this importance of changing maybe the environments and the way we are working together. If we have been so successful from an industry standpoint so far, it's because of these important collaborations across all the different stakeholders during the pandemic. And you have seen, all of us have seen the impact on this collaboration in the future. So I think it's important to be resilient, to continue to be open, to be connected to the environment. And so these notions of connecting the business to society is even more important than it was before. So if we move to the next slide, I think that there is this history of our funders. There is also this notion of where do we stand for and what is our sense of purpose. And really, and it could be perceived as normal for a pharma company to focusing on the value creation for patients now and in the future. But it's also important to make sure that we understand what means value for patients for a company like ourselves. And I think it's important when you start to focus on the patients to realize few elements. The first one is moving from populations to individuals and then back to subpopulations or clusters of patients. I think it's fair to say that we have been focusing on the last decades around trying to detect signals of what makes sense from a population standpoint and what is the impact on medicines that companies are putting and discovering and putting on the market from a population standpoint. These have creating huge value for patients and for treating diseases in the past. Moving forward, we do feel that there is value into moving from average patients or trying to move a certain criteria for a big part of the populations to better understand really what does it mean for individual patients, what makes an outlier different, what makes a patient different from the other, to continue to explore biology to a way that creates a better link to unique outcome and differentiation. And so when we think about patient value at UCB, we think about three components of it. One that you see on the slide, one is unique outcome. So how to increase the likelihood for the drug that we discover, for the medicine that we discover from the science, how can we increase the likelihood of building unique outcome out of this science? The second pillar of the patient's value is about the unique experience from a patient standpoint, right? Objective is not just to define new medicines and innovative medicine, but the objective is making sure that the patients who need to be treated with our medicine can have the best possible experience to allow them to live the life that they want and not being suffering from any kind of limitation. And of course, that the third pillar, if we want to do this, we need to make sure that the patients who need our treatment can have access to our medicine. So you see that the first pillar of innovation, which for us is critical for the success of the company in the long term, is to try to make sure that we can be clearer in the connectivities between differentiations of medicines and the real value delivered for the patient. And if you explore in that the external circle that you see here, if you explore this focus, then you need also to see that by nature, by doing so, you cannot be disconnected from the environment you are in. And so value for patients makes sense if you can also create internal within the company an ability for our employees to be at their best. So health and well-being of our employee are very consistent with our mission towards the patients. We need also to make sure that we create, of course, value for shareholders, but also for other stakeholders and the communities we are living in, because there is a link between these two. And then the health of the planet is also connected. So that's the heart of the purpose and what guides us. So now if we move to the next slide, there is, of course, this link to how to better connect the biology, and by connecting the biology, the patient to the science, then back the science to the solution, and the solutions back to the patients. And this is how we try to operationalize this patient's value strategy. And you see here Evenity. I mean, the objective I wanted to illustrate that with a concrete example, which I think illustrates these notions of better knowledge of the patients linked to unique outcome to treat a disease. If you think about fragility factor, the story of Evenity that is on the market now with our partner Amgen, start with the observation of a patient's population in South Africa, of patients suffering from sclerosis, which is a disease which is characterized by very dense bone. So they don't do any fracture because they have a very dense bone. Ability to detect the biology, why did they have this big density of their bone, is because of lack of sclerostin. And that's the scientific hypothesis that if we are able to engineer an antibody which targets sclerostin, then we can reproduce what's in these patients' populations nature have experimented. And that's the creations of homozozumab, which now is on the market as Evenity, to treat fragility fracture in a uniquely way, to be able within a year to reduce fracture by 50%. So you see here the clear link between the patient to the science to the solution, and the solutions back to the patient. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see a little bit more of who we are. We're focusing on two different therapeutic areas, neurology and immunology, our presence, numbers of employees. What I would like to highlight is the focus on innovations, which is translated, of course, in a high level of investments of our revenues in R&D. And you see where we are in terms of numbers of patients reached, translated into 5.3 billion of revenue last year, and an adjusted EBITDA ratio versus revenues of 27%. So if we move to the next slide, I think you see here the results. This strategy, focusing on innovations, have produced good financial results. I mean, 7 years of strong growth with 8% of CAGR in revenue and 16% of CAGR in adjusted EBITDA, with the objective to now invest into the next phase of product to be launched in the near that has to be launched in the near future, which is the explanation of the plateauing of the adjusted EBITDA right now. We move to the next slide. So that's for the financial piece. That's for the key strategic component that explain and justify where we are in terms of financial KPIs and business successes. But there is, of course, an element of evolutions and integrating. If we want to integrate sustainability in what we do, the objective is also to have a governance that supports our ambition from a sustainable growth commitment. And this is the first vision that you have here. First, what I would like to share is that the sustainability element is now incorporated to drive both societal impact and business growth, is incorporated in our corporate charter, which means that it's also a part of a regular agenda of our board, and which is also meaning that these are regular topics that are put on the table of the board meeting. The second element that you see here is that we have put in place last year in 2020 an external sustainability advisory board. Objective was to gather highest level of expertise to provide and help us with an unbiased challenge to what we are doing and how we are integrating sustainability in our strategy. We have now this external board in place with 6 members. Members are today Mr. Elhaj Assi, the president of the Kofi Annan Foundation, Mrs. Sandrine Dixon-de Clève, the co-president of the Club of Rome, Mrs. Charlotte Elsbold, the trustee forum of the future, Mrs. Teresa Fogelberg, former GRI deputy chief executive, Mrs. Anna Jones, president of the Knight Valiance Labs, who will become in the near future CEO of the Earthshot Prize, and Mr. Bright Simons, founder and president of MP Degree. So you can see here really the engagements towards connecting external perspective to what we are doing and having a strong governance platform to make sure that we connect and engage with external experts to help us to move on to our agenda. One of our board members is constantly present in our meeting with this external sustainability board to make sure that the two are connected. And so the third pillar that you see on the right-hand side is that we have now moved towards integrating also into the executive short-term incentive, which is aligned on this total performance, not only the financial performance, but the non-financial performance, which is described into value for patients, value for people, and value for the planet, which I would like to comment in the next part of this presentation. If we can move to the next slide, please. I think that our strategic growth path, so that was a little bit who we are. Now, if I move into the strategic growth path, I think we are very pleased with where we are. We have built strong foundations for future growth in the company. We have been able to, in this current phase of the strategy, to continue to progress with our core products based on differentiations. 2, we have made sure that we try to focus on the patient that can benefit the most. I can illustrate that with, for example, Cimzia, which despite to be the 5th anti-TNF on the marketplace, is growing and gaining a significant amount of share because we have been able to define areas of differentiation of the product, such as women of childbearing age, which have a uniqueness of the product versus the competition. We also, and you have seen, invest in a big part of the R&D to make sure that we are able to continue to deliver growth for the future. And we are building our strategic agenda by getting some flexibility that either from an inorganic standpoint or from a partnership standpoint, we are able to expand what we want, where we want to go, and focus even more to get critical scale on the areas that we want to focus even more. Moving to the next slide. Now, I want to move now to really try to illustrate quickly how do we connect more the company into society. I think it's fair to say that there have been a lot of volatility and change in the environment. And I feel that corporations cannot anymore be perceived as living their life just to try to achieve financial success and high return for shareholders without being connected to the society. There have been a lot of external insight that shows how much now things are connecting between corporations and society. And there is, I feel, a need for corporations to integrate the environmental and societal challenge into their strategy and into what success means and look like. And you can see that from the few excerpts that you see, illustration that you see here, how there is a call for more responsible business, integrating the different part of the stakeholders into the success of the company. How do we want to address, and we need to address, the rise of inequalities? And it's not just from a disease standpoint, but from an overall business standpoint. I think COVID has hit harder disadvantaged population in high-income countries and in low-income countries. So I think it's important for us to take care about that and to recognize that and to act upon that. Same thing on clinical trials and clinical development. We recognize also that there is a need to make sure that minorities will be in the future better represented and better included into the evaluations of our drugs. So we have an answer not only to the mainstream of the population that needs to be treated, but you cover also more broader population. And this is just few examples, such as also the impact of climate change on health. So I think it's fair to say that there is numerous of challenges and changes in the environment that corporations need to not only be aware, but integrated into what success means for us. And if we want to continue to be successful from a financial standpoint, short and long term, we need to integrate these elements. And this is what we did on the next slide. You will see the objective to make sure that we are connecting our sustainability framework, in a sense, towards what we want to achieve. We did an exercise which is aligned with recommendations of GRI to try to evaluate the trends of the environments and to see what was the most important elements of external environments who may have an impact on both business growth and societal impact, and integrate these key societal trends in a materiality analysis performed 2 years ago by the company and endorsed by our board, and we reported that in our integrated annual report in 2019. Out of the 9 most important materiality elements that we have defined in 2019, in this year, based on this analysis, we have defined a framework for sustainable impact based on this analysis, which incorporates and include a long-term value creations with our key stakeholders in mind. And this is how the 4 elements, the different elements that you have seen in the previous slide have been defined by UCB as the area of focus that we wanted of creating, with having in mind the patients that we are focusing on, which are patients with chronic and severe diseases, how people at UCB, how shareholders, and understanding and acknowledging the connection between human health and the health of the planet. And so to create this value for the patients, we are focusing on these differentiated solutions, which is scientific innovation as well as access. The value for the employee in mind, we want to make sure that we are creating an environment which is the best for our people, from a health, safety, well-being, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then the health of the planet, which is the recognition of the importance of understanding our impact on the environment and human health. So this is the framework that we have defined it. And so in a sense, having this definition, then we wanted to make sure that we are able to integrate these elements. And you see here, how do we translate this materiality analysis towards a framework from sustainability to definitions of what do we want to achieve for each of the component and the pillars of this sustainability framework. So mention value to patients, and you see here our objective for the period to come, so 2022-2025, continuing on our executions of the patient value strategy to make sure that we are increasing the level of differentiation that our solutions bring to the patients, and making sure that we increase the predictability of the response to make sure that all the patients who need our drugs may have access to them. That's the first value point. Second value point, making sure that the UCB employees are at their best and find an environment at work that allow them to be at their best. On the planet, we want to deliver our science-based targets towards carbon neutrality and reduce the consumptions of water and waste productions by 20 and 25%. And from a value for shareholder perspective, this is our 2025 ambition, where we want to lead in 5 specific patients populations, expecting to reach at least 6 billion of revenue and a profitability within the low and mid 30s. And at the same time, from a non-financial standpoint, making sure that we are improving significantly our ESG rating performance. So this is in a nutshell what we would like to achieve by combining what we are doing between financial and non-financial, and making sure that we are integrating these different components into our strategy dashboards and KPI. I move to the next slide. If I'm thinking about value for the patients, I will cover quickly this slide. You have seen it before. For some of you, it's part of our strategy and our classical communication to the external world. Objective is to continue to focus on patients and to be committed to make sure that the patients live the life they want to live and not have certain limitations because of the disease. So if we move to the next slide, please. That, of course, is translated into our pipeline. And you see here the pipeline that we have, which is a very significant pipeline for a company our size, which give us the strong platform to continue to produce growth above market in the coming years, and making sure that we are on track for a successful future. Just one element of illustration of these innovations, if you allow me, it's bimekizumab. Bimekizumab is, as you may know, the first anti-IL-17 which target at the same time A and F. The reason why F was important was based on the patient's observation, like Evenity. Looking at joint from patients suffering from psoriatic arthritis, we saw a high level of interleukin 17A, but also a high level of interleukin 17F. So we thought that if we would be able to engineer an antibody which target the 2 interleukin at the same time, that could be translated into a better outcome for the patients. And this is what we have been able to confirm. First, we've been able to engineer this antibody and create this molecule, bimekizumab, that target at the same time interleukin 17A and F. And moving from there, being able to translate that with 3 comparative phase 3 or phase 3B study versus standard of care that have demonstrated superiority. So that's just an illustration of focusing on biology and what makes patients unique, can translate that into a molecule that can deliver a unique outcome for the patients. If we can move to the next slide. Of course, if you want to build on innovations, you need to make sure that you have an innovative engine that is likely to produce the product for the future that will bring differentiations. And as we are focusing on innovations, we have this type of platform. I mentioned our antibody engineering platform, which is the biological entity that you see here in the green part. We have also the small molecules platform, the chemical entities. That was the 2 pillars of UCB. Through the acquisition of Ra Pharma, we have also integrated a peptides platform into our research engine. And we are now building also some capabilities in gene therapy to prepare for the future of science. moving from to the next slide. So you see a bold ambitions, making sure that we want to make sure that we have innovation. The second pillar of the innovation for patients is, of course, access, and making sure that the patients who need this product will have access to the medicine. So you see here the different pillars that we want to focus on in order to strengthen our view on access in the future. We have made great progress into the second pillar, which is working in partnerships with healthcare systems to secure reimbursement for patients. And we have defined KPIs here, which is our access performance index for our key products in 14 high-income countries to try to monitor and to see progress. So this is the baseline that we are having today. We have now objective to continue to improve and making sure that we can expand the access for the patients who need to be treated with our products in the future. It's also important that access is based on value, and we have increased the value-based contracting that we have both in Europe and in the US. We have now more than hundreds of value-based contracting with payers that change the way we are engaging with different stakeholders towards really the value that can be delivered. But of course, all of that, and I mentioned that in the introductions, all of that needs to be done if we are able to work together. So I think it's a dream to think that stakeholders can change by itself independently from others. And if we see, and if we are convinced, such as I am, that the future is in more collaborations, more ability to work together, I think it's important to recognize that we will change as a society, we will improve the impact on society if we are able to embark on this change, the different stakeholders towards a better value. You are here, you see here a few elements that I feel are important to work upon together in order to make progress in the near future. First, I think we need to consider health from a societal standpoint as an investment and not a cost. I think that today the fragmentation of the system and the constraint from a budget standpoint, the fragmentations of the data, see that we are much more still into a transactional negotiation with payers more than an holistic view of how to create more value for society through a better health for all population. Two, I think we need to have a better sense and a better alignment of what value means. Three, I think we need to recognize that the silos approach and the fragmented approach will not bring us where we need to be. And four, all of that makes sense if we are able to keep the patients with us and that we are not leaving any patients behind. So this is the first pillar. I will cover quickly the other pillar. The next slide, you can see that we want to define how good we are from our internal people. So the well-being of our people and value for our patients. It goes from health, safety, and well-being to diversity, equity, and inclusions, and performance and growth to help people to grow and to develop. You can see here some of our KPIs we have defined, and health, safety, and well-being index for 2020. So that's the baseline that we have defined, 78.4%. People engagements, 87%. We are monitoring that on a regular basis. And more than 90% of our people have been engaged into development, evaluations, and dialogue with their manager, and have regular feedback and performance review, and 84% of our people have career development program in place already today. Next slide, you can see how we are on track to deliver our science-based targets on the reduction of our water consumptions and waste. These are the numbers that we have published already. Which is the final element of what we would like to build. So you see the sustainability integrations, which value for patients, value for our people, and value for the planet. This is how we structure that. And I would like to start to the conclusion of what we are doing. All of that guide us to what success looks like. I've mentioned already the guidance for 2025 from both financial and non-financial perspective that you can see here, our commitment for 2025. Next slide. I think it's also important for us to make sure that we get the financial flexibility to pursue the opportunity that we want to have, and making sure that we are able, through the management of our cash flow and our debt, to make sure that we get this financial flexibility that also allow us to provide a significant return for our shareholders through the dividend and having a good flexible balance sheet. The last slide, I think, will be to continue to express to you and share with you as a summary the strategy. How do we define success from both financial and non-financial, and what does it mean for the period 22 to 25? And I think with that, Luc, I will get back to you for the Q&A. Thank you very much for your interest, and thank you for your trust and confidence in the company. Luc, I don't know if you are unmuted, but I cannot hear you.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jean-Christophe, for that presentation. We have a couple of questions. Looks like I cannot turn on my camera, so if you can bear with my audio, I'm okay. We have a couple of questions from the audience, but folks, please do send those in, as I'll be watching those and relaying those to Jean-Christophe. But before we go into that, I wonder, Jean-Christophe, you started with describing the history of UCB. This is a company that's been around for a long time and has taken a long view, but it's also a mid-sized company, 8,000 or so employees, as you pointed out. Are there certain advantages or disadvantages to operating from this perspective when trying to emphasize some of these ESG goals, compared with, say, some of the companies we heard from earlier today, the larger multinationals?
Well, thank you for the question. I think the first advantage that I see, and I mentioned it, and that the reason why I started with this slide, I feel that having a reference shareholder, having a strong family background behind the scene is helping us to try to make sure that we can combine what makes sense from a short-term perspective and a financial perspective versus what makes sense for the long term. So this balance between the short-term and the long-term always has been there in the company and in the conversation that we have with our board. And if you have constantly this perspective of short and long-term, by nature, there is a more natural link towards the societal impact and the sustainability elements on top of the financial one. From a size standpoint, I think that what our size gives us as an advantage is, by nature, we need to focus on elements of success which are not linked to scale. And because if it's linked to scale, that of course a bigger company will have a bigger chance to be successful. So for the beginning, the focus on innovation is a natural one for a mid-sized company if you want to be sustainable and to be successful for the long term. And I do feel that this direct link between innovation and long-term success for a company our size is an advantage. So this focus on the quality, this focus on innovation, this focus of research, which is for us the core of where we are, create that link to the value for patients that we want to deliver, where I think that our company our size is more agile and equipped to make that link and to make sure that we are avoiding areas where scale are important. So the reference shareholders give us a sense of long-term, size give us a sense of the necessity to focus on innovation.
Now, I wonder also, people might wonder, is it hard for a mid-sized company to do a lot of the things that some of the bigger companies do? I wonder, is there, if you could make one change, like one baseline rule or law, or even business custom, really, internationally, that could be a forcing function that everyone would need to level up to, what would that be?
Well, I think it was in the, I went maybe a little bit quickly on this one, but that was in the slide about the ability first to work together and to work together on what value means. If you feel that the value for society is really connected to unique outcome for patients and differentiations, and health is need to be an investment more than a cost. If there is one thing that I would like to change is this one, that the stakeholders recognize that the value for the society will be more impactful and more important if we have better medicine. If you look at the impact on medicines, on society, on life expectations in the last decades, it has been massive. And a society is better where all our citizens are in better health, which required a need to integrate everything together. And what makes sense for the patients, integrations of data, and an ability to evaluate what value means and how we want to recognize the value. So I think that if we could move towards a more international view and agreement behind what value means, if at the same time we integrate all the component on value, not just a comparison of cost versus another cost, but all component on value that create a real outcome where for the whole society to benefit. I think if we can build that in the near future, I think we can leverage a lot of today waste in the different system and make sure that we're investing in what makes sense from a societal standpoint.
Certainly, treatment of rheumatoid arthritis is one example where if you're able to effectively treat that, a lot of benefits flow from that in terms of less time lost from work and better outlook on life, family life.
You know, look, I'm amazed to see, we are focusing on chronic diseases, right? For each patient, when you talk to them and when you ask them at the beginning how much time it took for you to get the right diagnostic, to have the right treatment and to feel better, you realize there is a huge amount of time which is wasted in the system at the beginning because the patients do not have the ability to be identified. I mean, you have that with chronic disease such as myasthenia gravis. You have that through even fragility factor and osteoporosis, even psoriasis. I mean, even psoriasis today, there is a time between symptom and diagnostic, which is far too long. And if you translate that in terms of cost for society, it's huge. And if we can, and we have the solution, right? Which is really a frustration today. It's not that we need to invest into research and science to suddenly be more efficient. In some of these areas, we have everything we need to reduce the time between symptom to diagnostic to have an early treatment. And in immunoinflammations in autoimmune disease, which is the area where we are focused on, we know that the sooner we can have an interception, the sooner we have an ability to reduce the level of inflammation of the patient, the better the patient is for the long run, which means also that it's a better in value for society. And this is just one element. Another element at the end of the spectrum is patient adherence, patient engagement, ability for the patient to understand his or her own health, what is important for her and he, and make sure that they can do their own decision for their disease. We are still much far away from this in a lot of different countries.
Okay, so we have a question from the audience here. This is clearly from an investor. Wants to know, how do you view the link, the correlation between the extra or non-financial sustainability factors and financial value?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, I don't have a precise answer right now. I mean, if you look at the literature, if you look at what has been observed so far, you have an intuition, you have an ability to say that, and it has been demonstrated, I think overall, it has been demonstrated that the companies who are better in non-financial criteria on the long run are also more successful from a financial standpoint. So this is kind of the macro view that we have, which is relatively well established right now. And it's quite logic, right? It's quite logic that if you want to be successful in the long term, you cannot ignore the impact on society and the non-financial criteria. For example, people engagement. If you compare the success of companies with high level of engagement at their own employees, they have a better financial result than the one they have a poor engagement, because by nature, poor people engagements, it's quite logic to think that they will create a lower financial performance. However, making a clear link between if I'm improving my non-financial KPIs by X%, my adjusted EBITDA for the next 3 years will be improved by X%. I think this is really a challenge that we don't have this precise link. We have the overall ability to try to see that better non-financial create more value. We have this intuition. It has been, I think, demonstrated at macro level, but this precise link between the two, I think there is still some work to do.
It would be nice to run a randomized controlled study on this.
But I don't know who wants to be on the placebo group, right?
Right. Okay, so another question from the audience. Person asked, many of your future products will require that providers are trained in how to diagnose and determine appropriate treatment, which you alluded to earlier, especially for future gene-based therapy. How will you work with governments to help support health systems strengthening efforts to ensure the infrastructure is available along the patient journey to maximize patient outcomes?
I think it's a great question. And as I said, I think the system is currently suffering from a much more fragmented approach. So this is one element. So making sure that we can have a vision that illustrates and integrate the different stakeholders that contribute to the value. And we cannot work independently from each other. We need to work together. If I take one example for fragility fracture, today we know that only 1 patient out of 5 who have a fragility fracture have a diagnostic. It's even not what I mentioned before, that the diagnostic is late, it's just not done. And this is linked to the fragmentation of the system in place. So we need to make sure that people work really together. And if we are collaborating and working together, the part of the question, which is making sure that we communicate what's need to be done, and we can anticipate what will be done and what will be needed in order for these patients to be treated and to be diagnosed, will be much better done in the future. There is another element which also I think we need to do a better job in, is to help the other stakeholders to anticipate what will come. I think that very often, sometimes the other part of the equation that we need to work with are surprised because suddenly they see something coming they have not anticipated, and the systems are not ready. So in this holistic view, I think there is also an element of anticipation, which means engaging with stakeholders earlier. I think we were in a business model where in the past we saw the value chain as a sequence of events, starting with science, then clinical development, then commercializations and pricing and access. I think that we need to integrate much more in the future than what we have, and sharing with the different stakeholders at relatively early stage. This is what's coming on, and so people can be prepared and try to see what part of the systems needs to be changed. 2 last points on this one. I do feel that if we are more on a value-based standpoint, it will change also the way we define price. I think today we still have a price defined per product, per consumptions. I think there is maybe a need in the future, if we are more moving from disease symptomatic treatment to disease modifications or to cure, we will need a different scheme of pricing that recognize the fact that it's not just a chronic usage of a product, but sometimes one intervention may have a long-lasting value that needs to be recognized in a different way. So I think that's an important element to consider. The second element to consider is, if you can see about the evolution of science, I think it will be also important to share more what is important for society. What are the priorities that society wants to focus on? We knew, for example, from antimicrobial resistance, that this is an area where public health wants us to be more active, and I do feel that we need to address that. I mean, from an industry standpoint, we are setting up a fund that allow to stimulate research there. But I think that a better understanding and sharing of what is important for society, what we can and we cannot deliver, we can be able to have more convergence towards a likelihood of be successful where the society wants us to be successful. So be more flexible and agile on the system, pricing processes, how we do see that in the future, being more integrated, working together in earlier to be better anticipating and making sure that we understand what is important for the other side and what is likely or unlikely to happen may help the system to be more efficient, I think, in the future.
You know, I think those kind of dialogues you describe have been occurring for quite some time, but I wonder if maybe in the wake of the pandemic, people on all sides are maybe a little more receptive or able to understand that these are the things that are coming in the pipeline. They can be very impactful. They can come very quickly. Maybe a little more motivated to listen and work together.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, I mean, the pandemic to me have illustrated the value for the different part of the value chain to talk together and to work together. And I think this piece was maybe a little bit missing before, and we had a too much fragmented approach. I do feel that if we can keep this high level of collaboration and ability to work together, understanding that we are all here for the same thing in a sense, we want the society to be better, and a healthier population creates a better society. So we should be able to find our way towards these objectives.
Okay, this is a little different question. With water consumption, what is a practical sustainability goal for the industry? Is it to minimize usage or to minimize impact on water ecosystems?
I mean, I think, of course, its objective is to minimize to protect the resource that we have, which is somewhat rare in a sense. One element here, first of all, I think it's also different from company to company and industry to industry. I mean, within pharma, for example, we know, if I take just one example, monoclonal antibody productions, manufacturing sites require more water than others. So this is something that the reason why for us it's important to make sure that we are innovative enough and creating cycle that reduce the consumption of water, because by nature we are in a manufacturing in antibody engineering in an area which the consumptions of water is more important than for others. So we need to be particularly conscious about that and precautionous about that. So it starts by making sure that we put the maximum effort to try to reduce the consumptions, and then try to see how we can protect for the long term, not only reduce the consumptions, but find a way that make sure that we are protecting for the consumption of water in the future for the planet. Yes.
Good question, and thanks for that answer. We've got about another minute or two here. Last question. Digitization strategies are a great opportunity for the biopharma industry to leverage data and information that are creating value for patients. Do you think the pharma industry is in advance versus other industries? I guess in the lead. And what is, in your point of view, the first-in-class industry in digitization?
So the first part of the question, a quick answer is no. I don't think that pharma is particularly in advance in leveraging the data in our environment. Once again, I'm sorry to be repetitive, but to me, the most important reason for that is the fragmentation of data. I think there is also an element of data privacy and data protections, but I think the most important element is fragmentation of data. You know, we are able from time to time to summarize the situation. I think we are able from time to time to take pictures, but we don't have a clear view on the movie. And it's very important, if we want to be more efficient at a societal level, to do much more disease strategy, but not just disease strategy and optimize this strategy at population level, but at each individual level. And so what is the best next move for an individual patient to optimize his outcome is something that data should leverage much more. So I mean, I do feel that we need to make sure that the data are connecting to each other. The interoperability on data in health are very much important and crucial, and we are not there. Even the countries who have a very single system in place, do not leverage the value of the data. You talk to UK, I mean, NHS have a strong centralized database. They are making great progress, but there are still some fragmentation of data. So I don't feel that we are ahead of other industry. We are far from that. I think we need to solve these notions of confidentiality and protecting the patient. On the other end, when you ask patients if they want to share the data, their data, in order to have more engagement and being better results, they say yes, that they want to make sure that their data can help them, but also other patients to have better outcome. So I do feel that digitalization needs to go to leveraging the data, and it works from science. I mean, we are making great progress in research by digitalizations, by being able to use computational science to accelerate the validations of hypotheses. And so I'm very confident that the cycle will be reduced there. Data in average real-world evidence data to shorten also the cycle of development it's an evidence. I think we will see an evolution of the way we are testing drugs in the future by leveraging more live in-life data instead of building big, long clinical trials. It may not be possible for all criteria and all diseases, but I think we can accelerate the cycle there. And from a patient's engagement, diagnostic, treatment, and better outcome, data could be much more leveraged than today. So we are far from where we should be. There is a lot of work that needs to be done from a system standpoint, process standpoint, legal and security standpoint, but the technology is there. I don't think it's a technology challenge. I think it's much more now a mindset challenge and an ability for the patients to recognize that they will have better outcome if they are more open to share their data and monitor and manage the data along the time, and also making sure that the different stakeholders connect their data together. Today, hospital data are not connected to private physicians' data. Now, to the second part of the question, what type of industry is ahead of us? I think a lot have done some huge. I mean, you look at banking and the way they have evolved, the digitalizations in the past. It has been, they have done the journey. Communications company, all of these industry have done tremendous projects. Sorry, I'm running out of time, I think.
Yeah. Biopharma is certainly not the earliest adopter of industries on digitalization, and for all the reasons you mentioned, it's a very hard problem, but also I think a solvable problem when people are properly focused and motivated. But it does take a whole lot of people, not just industry and patients, but people in other realms as well. Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much, Jean-Christophe, for this lively conversation. And I want to remind viewers that we're heading into a break. There's going to be a brief video from the Biosafety Roundtable, Biopharma Sustainability Roundtable, so please check that out. And we will reconvene at 12:30 with a presentation from Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla. Thanks very much for joining us.
Look, thank you very much. Thank you all. Bye-bye now.
Sustainability, or a concern for the broad environmental and social impacts of businesses and how they're governed, is gaining more and more attention from investors, regulators, and the public. The Biopharma Sustainability Roundtable has been designed as a platform to connect and inform biopharma executives as they move their sustainability agendas forward.
Each meeting really feels like a masterclass, and this engagement really expedited my ability not just to come up to speed in my new role, but to deliver impact to my company, Bristol Myers Squibb.
We got involved with the Sustainability Roundtable because it's one of the leading industry-level coalitions working on sustainability integration in the industry.
We've actually managed to come together as a sector and provide some guidance on and consensus around what we see are the most material issues from a sector perspective. And I think that that's really unique and quite powerful and extraordinary, actually, from a sector perspective. So that has been extremely valuable and something that I believe is really unique.
Having a group that is focused on sustainability, specifically in our industry, provides an unmatched resource to learn from each other about what the others are doing and the challenges that they are also facing. And it has added to my network very knowledgeable professionals and the possibility to find solutions together.
So what makes us different? I think there are 2 points to be mentioned here. First, we have a double focus, both on the sector and on the topic of ESG and sustainability. And second, we have been able to create a level of trust that allows for open and frank discussions with no hidden agendas. So we invite you to participate.